Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be going over all the new content that was released for the January 18th maintenance. So, this maintenance brought forth new evolutions for Horus, Bastet, and Anubis, along with buffs to the Noir snow globes. So the new evolutions are obviously exciting because it breathes new life into those somewhat aging cards, and the buff to Snow Globe experience is massive because if you were able to complete the previous Snow Globe challenge, you should have six, because you get a free one, awaiting for you, and that's a lot of experience which will easily level up basically any dark card that you wish. Unfortunately, this new maintenance did not come with the highly anticipated Raw Dragon evolution, so some people may be feeling a little disappointed. So, as a little bit of a background to the Egyptian One Pantheon, the Egyptian One Pantheon, with the exception of Isis, has all received a reincarnated evolution. And these reincarnated evolutions greatly bolster their weighted stats, their leadership potential, and possibly an extra awakening skill if it had space to do so. And for a long time, like at least when they were first released, they were considered some of the strongest leaders in the game. Now, they've kind of gone up and down based on the new evolutions as they've been released, and most notably, like when they first came out, they were great, then they kind of lost traction, and then they gained some traction back again, and then they lost it, and now presently we have these new evolutions being released. And their main problem right now is that they require an active skill to be used in order to achieve their full multiplier. And that is problematic because they don't hit very hard if you don't use an active skill, and using an active skill every single turn has its own problems because you either have to sacrifice one sub-slot for like a quick charging active skill, or you have to stall at inopportune times, or you just simply run out of steam partway through the dungeon. So it does definitely place constraints on your clearing potential, and generally speaking, they are better suited to dungeons where they have predictable encounters, and because that way you can budget active for each floor, so it basically transitions into like almost mindless farming because you have it all planned out to the T. So a good example of this is using Reincarnated Ra, or even Awoken Ra from before, to farm Machine Zeus. You knew exactly when to use your active skills, and you could clear the dungeon with ease because of that. So, Reincarnated Horus is basically kind of giving rebirth to this fiery chicken. And he gained actually an extra TPA awakening along with very nice weighted stats with a very heavily weighted into attack and quite strong recovery. Their active skill enhances all fire orbs along with 2+ seconds to orb movement time for a single turn on only a 4-turn cooldown. Their leader skill has been changed to do 4 times damage with 4 colors or 5 times with 5. Basically, hearts don't count, so basically fire, water, wood, and dark. And you actually have 2 times attack and 4 times recovery when an active skill is used. Now, this translates for dual Horus leaders into 100 times attack and 4 times recovery. So it's not too bad. Like, it's a reasonable multiplier, and just like as a general quick, I'm trying to experiment with this sort of little table, but for the pros, Horus does have a flexible leader skill. You have 16 to 100 times damage. You have 1,000 weighted stats. You have 100 times attack, which is still respectable. His active skill is a short cooldown, so you are able to inherit something over top of it. He has 2 Skillbind Resist Awakenings, and that is quite good for solo play because it greatly alleviates team building constraints. He covers fire and water, which is relatively 2 awkward colors on rainbow teams. And he actually can use orb changers for his team because he doesn't require hard orbs. Or conversely, you could even use, say, a double orb changer if you really wanted, because you'd have 64 times damage if you flooded the board with a double orb changer. So you have some flexibility at least. On the flip side, what are the downsides of Reincarnated Horus is that he is active skill reliant for damage. So because you need an active skill to gain damage, you're not going to be hitting very hard for most of the content, so you have to plan out your active skills very carefully. In addition, your RCV or your recovery component is tied to active skills. Now, if that had been simply, if his recovery component had been passive instead of active skill reliant, it'd be reasonable because you could easily stall on most content because 4 times recovery is massive. Pretty much any hard work match will heal you to full health. Unfortunately, that's not the case, so you are just going to suffer. Your damage is only okay at best. Like, in all honesty, 100 times damage for a Rainbow Leader is, like, it sounds great on paper, but the thing is, you're obviously having diluted damage because you have to use other colors potentially, even a full mono fire team is reasonable, but you are still losing space and fire orb matching potential because you have to have at least 9 other, well, really 12 other orbs being matched alongside of it. So you do have diminished capabilities to match lots of fire orbs. And last but not least, the wrong chicken that got the evolution. So basically, as I meant, basically covered through all the pros and cons already, Reincarnated Horus has basically always traded a higher damage multiplier for more consistency. And having more consistency was perhaps great when Pad first came out, because back then there were actually very few leaders who had high multipliers, with Horus being one of the higher ones, and there was no access to board changers, there was no time extend, so having this like safety net was beneficial at the time because it at least allowed you to have the opportunity to actually activate your leader skill even without perfect matching skills. However, in today's meta, we don't need a safety net. We need you to excel at something, and Horus just simply does not. He is just kind of the middle of the road, and being middle of the road nowadays is not really good enough because you want basically a team that can excel at something. And by that I mean you want either have very high damage, great survivability, utility, whatever it may be, but Horus just kind of is in the middle of all of those. So you don't necessarily would favor him as your top team or leader because he just doesn't excel. Now, 100 times for a rainbow team is, like I said, reasonable. Like, it sounds nice on paper 100 times, but as I mentioned already, you can't flood the board with fire orbs, so you are wasting essentially 12 orbs or 4 combo space worth of other colors in order to actually activate your multiplier. Furthermore, with the active skill being reliant on active skills, you can't use that damage all the time. If he had this damage all the time without an active skill, he'd actually be quite fantastic. Like, it'd be amazing, but the thing is, if you compare Horus to Raw Dragon, it's just sad because Raw Dragon has more damage, he has a health multiplier, and he has recovery multiplier all the time. He doesn't have to use an active skill, so he has much greater consistency by comparison. So Horus is just going to feel a little lackluster as a leader. However, if we step outside of a leadership role for Horus, he does have quite a few merits, at least from a sub point of view, because he actually has a low base cooldown, so you can easily inherit something beneficial over top of it. In addition, he has 2 TPAs with high base attack, so you can achieve high burst damage on certain teams like, say, Awoke or Reincarnated Shiva. And he also has 2 Skillbind Resist Awakenings, and dual Skillbind Resist Awakenings is actually quite powerful because he alone provides 40% coverage, so you can use pretty much any sub that you wish, so you can basically build your team more easily because you don't have to worry about having full Skillbind immunity coverage. So, well, and I guess last thing is that he does cover fire, water, so those are reasonable merits. Like, he does have uses. You could even use him as, say, like a Ranave sub instead of Razul if you really wanted to, because he has good awakenings. Granted, he can be bound unlike Razul, but it's a budget alternative to Razul at least. So next is Reincarnated Bastet, and she has also received the similar treatment in that she has 1,000 weighted stats with a healthy distribution between all three of the categories. Her active skill is still weak in this day and age because you gain mass attack for 3 turns and plus 2 seconds of orb movement time for 1 on a 5-turn cooldown. So it's just a little awkward. It has very low impact, and her leader skill has been greatly improved because she now is able to achieve 3 times attack with 5 combos, and this scales up to 5 times with 9. So you do have the potential to hit 25 times damage with 9 combos. However, you gain 2.5 times attack when using an active skill. So when you use that active skill, you are able to achieve 156 times attack, which is quite amazing because you are a mono wood team that does not necessarily have to match other colors. You could be very wood heavy board and still achieve high damage. So in terms of pros and cons, she has a scaling leader skill, so there is obviously a large amount of damage control because she goes from 9 times all the way to 156. 1,000 weighted stats, which is great. 156 times attack, so that's really high burst damage. Her short cooldown at least has the potential to be inherited over top. Her team building is flexible because there's no restriction. You can use basically any sub you wish. Ideally, you want to have wood cards, of course, but you can basically use any wood sub that you basically choose or please. And she's also cute, and cute is important when playing puzzle and waifus. For cons, she's active skill reliant, and it's that active skill reliancy that is problematic. It's can be frustrating that you make 9 combos, which is not easy to do, and only have 25 times damage. It's just going to feel lackluster, and if you have to dedicate a slot to an active skill, it's just going to be problematic. And you do have a weak base active, in all honesty. Like, the mass attack is not really that helpful, to be honest, and the 2 bonus seconds or movement time is okay. It can remove debuffs, but it's basically just a low value active that's just there. It was probably made that way when she was first released to compensate for her strength at the time, but now it's just quite lackluster, and combined with the fact that she doesn't have like the greatest leader skill available, that it's just not really fair to give her such a weak active. Furthermore, this should be here, I don't know why it's not showing it, but she has no defensive multiplier, so she is more vulnerable to more durable bosses or dungeons that require you to have some stalling involved. So she does have weaknesses there. So, as I may have mentioned already, Reincarnated Bastet is a massive improvement on her Awoken form, because she basically went from a 36 times leader to 156 times. And in addition to having a stronger active skill usage, basically a stronger active skill multiplier, you also have gained a higher combo threshold potential, because now instead of being capped at 7 combos for damage, you can go up to 9 for damage. And by matching 9, you obviously unleash more than beforehand. So this is an improvement, because if you're just doing pure combos, you are able to achieve a much higher multiplier if you are able to hit the 8 and 9, which is challenging, of course. Unfortunately, she still is a glass cannon leader, and as a glass cannon leader, it is problematic because she's not actually easy to activate. So, like Horus, Bastet does offer 25 times attack when you use an active skill, but this can be challenging in difficult content because you may not necessarily have enough active skills available for the dungeon. And this obviously can be alleviated through shorter content or co-op when you have at least 10 instead of 6 active skills. But the point being is, it does make it more challenging to play out harder dungeons when you may need more than 1 active skill potentially per floor, or if you need to bring utility. So it is frustrating. However, you do have the potential to deal lethal damage due to her TPA awakenings. Her team building ideally wants to have TPAs, and the fact that she has 2 herself means that she's going to be hitting for quite high damage. And with basically Reincarnated Bastet, your team is going to have a large amount of damage potential, because you could still hit 7 combos, let's say, and with 7 combos you are probably going to be able to throw in a TPA or 2, but 7 combos will give you 100 times damage with that active skill. And that is a phenomenal amount of damage, in all honesty, like 100 times with TPA. And the fact that you're monocolor means you could have potentially multiple wood combos. So great damage output potentially there. So that is something to keep in mind when I'm comparing her to Bastet. So Ace Bastet is basically a different evolution tree for Bastet that was reasonably strong. When you compare the two, a Reincarnated Bastet actually has a much higher final damage multiplier. Well, not much higher. It's a higher peak damage multiplier. However, Bastet does have some advantages because they are able to achieve a much higher multiplier without an active skill. They can hit up to 64 times damage without actually using an active skill, so that is a lot more rewarding compared to Reincarnated's 25 times. However, Bastet, in order to achieve her maximum multiplier, needs to have at least 3 separate wood combos, and 3 separate wood combos probably needs an active skill to be used, so you're basically using an active skill in either regards to achieve your higher multiplier. However, depending on the orb changer you use, you may potentially overflood your board with wood orbs, and you may not be able to break them up as well. You probably don't use TPA as efficiently with Bastet as well, so that is another downside. Naturally, both of them are still glass cannons, and they have no defensive multipliers. But another thing to keep in mind is that Reincarnated Bastet does have perhaps a few more advantages. Most notably, she does have almost 200 more weighted stats, which does become quite significant when both your leaders are basically providing 400 more stats, along with the fact that Reincarnated Bastet is TPA based, and the dual TPA is a lot safer than God Killer, because God Killer you can't turn on and off, and it's going to be dealing damage, and you may heal absorption bosses, whereas Reincarnated Bastet will not be, because your TPA is kind of, you can turn it on and off, in the sense that you can choose to make the TPA or you don't. So you have a way to control your damage a bit more strongly by comparison. In addition, Ace Bastet does ramp up faster with combos, so again, damage control can be more of an issue by comparison. But overall, they are somewhat similar, and unless you have the resources to potentially dump into Reincarnated Bastet, you may be just better off keeping her as Ace Tet for now, because it is still, while a fun team, it's not going to necessarily push you into more endgame content than other cards you may have already available. And last but not least, for the new Reincarnated evolutions is Reincarnated Anubis. So again, he has 1,000+ weighted stats, and he actually gained a Recover Bind Awakening, which is significant. His active skill is still Wood, Jammers, Poison to Dark, along with 4 turns of a counterattack on lengthy 8-turn cooldown. His leader skill has been revamped to provide 5 times attack with 9 combos and up to 10 times with 11. So I'm assuming it's 7.5 with 10 combos. However, you do gain 3 times attack when an active skill is used, and this allows you to achieve 900 times damage. So 900 times damage is a ridiculous amount. And the pros for Reincarnated Anubis is you do have some form of damage control because you are able to actually use an active skill and do 9 times damage. Provided you don't make 9 combos, which is generally hard to do, you should be able to control your damage on various absorption bosses, most notably Sopdet. In addition, you have the high-rated stats, and you have this potential for 900 times attack, which will pretty much destroy any monster in the game. You are unbindable along with having this new Recover Bind Awakening, which is more applicable to his role as a sub, potentially, or a leader, really, actually. It's just great all around. His active skill also removes Hazardous Orbs, which is beneficial. It can lower the need to bring full board changers if there's scattered amounts of Jammers and Poisons. And the counterattack does have niche applications, but it is niche. And he still can be called the one true god. So, for cons, Reincarnated Anubis has very inconsistent activation. It's challenging to hit 9 combos from a given board, and it's impossible without Skyfalls to hit 11. So there's a great consistency issue, and you have to basically, there's a certain degree of Skyfall and praying involved when you play Reincarnated Anubis, because it's just really hard to hit that many combos, like, in all honesty. There's also no defensive multiplier to make up for the fact that you may have many boards where you have 7-8 combos and you just don't get Skyfall, so you'll have to find a way to stall without any defensive components. And lastly, his active skill has quite a long cooldown for the value it provides. So, as I already said, Reincarnated Anubis is a significantly revamped leader skill in that it has improved his consistency from terrible to less terrible. Because Reincarnated Anubis now at least provides 25 times damage with 9 combos, whereas before it was much lower, and in addition, when you use an active skill, you now gain 9 times damage as opposed to 6.25. And 9 times damage can at least kill some things in the game, which will at least help you out because you can get by say, Sopdet, or maybe more trash floors because you just pop an active skill and just match away. So there's at least a little bit more leeway. Unfortunately, with a 6x5 board, at most you can have is 10 combos because there's 30 orbs, 30 divided by 3 is 10, so maximum is 10. And it's very hard to get that perfect board distribution. So most likely scenario is you're going to have 7 to 8 combos. And 7 to 8 combos does not even activate your lower tier multipliers, so you have to find a way to get 9 combos somehow, but most boards will not allow you to. So you'll have to pray that this actually occurs, so your consistency is going to be quite low, along with being risky because it may not happen, and to be fair, it's challenging to necessarily erase the entire board every single time given what you were presented with. However, one thing to keep in mind is Reincarnated Anubis may have some potential when combined with 7x6 leaders, because he does provide 30 times damage by himself. And with a 7x6 leader, you are able to have 42 orbs, which is a maximum of 14 combos. So yes, you may not obviously use the full 14, but you're more likely to hit 9 combos with 42 orbs than you would have with 30 orbs. However, right now, A10 is the strongest choice for North America, and until we get new cards or something that's more dark-based, Anubis won't necessarily have the greatest 7x6 pairing available. So Shifting away from this risky leadership role, Reincarnated Anubis is actually quite a powerful mono-dark sub because he has the bind immunity, he has nice utility awakenings, and he has recover bind. And this recover bind allows him to clear 3 turns of binds with a row of hard orbs. Now, it'd obviously be more helpful if you did at least manufacture hard orbs, but you can inherit something over top of him so he can act as your pseudo bind clear, or a more hard bind clear if you choose to inherit something that actually clears binds immediately. So he does have potential there, and his God and Devil typing, at least, and balance, allows him to be used on basically any dark team in the game. So this is quite fantastic, and it does help alleviate some team building because he can use on any team available, and he does provide a great deal of utility. Now, one last thing I want to point out is that his active skill is unique in that it does at least remove hazards without breaking hearts. However, most other double hazard removal plus single orb change are 7-turn cooldowns along with haste. Think Satsuki or the Mechanical 2 series like Castor and Spica. So he does have low value active because 4 turns of counterattack is incredibly niche and very situational when you do need that. Haste is better in the vast majority of scenarios. And the counterattack is pretty much used to help overcome certain resolve bosses that you can actually survive their execution ability. And by that I mean when you actually kill a resolve boss, they go down to 1 health and then they do whatever their 1% ability is. Most of the time it actually flat out kills you, so that's not helpful, but some of them do like a reasonable attack and then other mechanics. And with Reincarnated Anubis, you actually just kill them with that counterattack, so you bypass all of that nonsense. Now, this has perhaps the most applications against, say, Zeus and Hera, because Zeus and Hera will do a damage-based attack and then heal. So when they do the damage-based attack, they just kill themselves, so they don't actually get to heal. So that is beneficial. Unfortunately, this won't work against Il-6, so Il-6 is obviously a much more dangerous resolve boss, so there's not many resolve bosses you can use this against unless you have a large amount of damage mitigation to survive their execution and kill them with the counterattack. So it's just something to keep in mind, it has niche applications, but it's not useful in most scenarios, unfortunately. And then lastly, with this update, the Snow Globe Noirs, or the purple Snow Globes, have been buffed to provide 3 million off-color experience instead of the original 2. So now when feeding to a dark monster, you get 4.5 million experience. Hooray. It's great. It's a buff. Can't complain about that. So, in conclusion, the Egyptian 1 Pantheon evolutions are nice. They do at least provide new leaders you can use. Unfortunately, none of the leaders are necessarily going to be the strongest ones available. They're just going to provide more fun to play with because they're not going to necessarily push you into further endgame content. They're just providing more variety in the terms of leaders you have access to. And to be fair, I feel like there is a lot of players who are disappointed because there's no Raw Dragon released. And as regards to why there's no Raw Dragon being released, I don't know. I honestly can't say why. I don't know what Gung-Ho, I don't see into the minds of Gung-Ho. Maybe they're waiting to release all the Monster Point Dragon evolutions at the same time, but who knows. But hopefully the ultimate fried chicken comes to North America soon. So, of these 3 new evolutions, who are you most excited for and how do you plan to use them? This article will be found in the YouTube description below, so let me know what you think. So, hopefully you have a mantastic day and happy puzzling!